pleasure to be here and to be invited as a speaker. And I guess we just saw some stuff with algae and then some plant cells, and now we're coming back to taking plants and instead of growing plants, we're growing yeast. And so I did have to chat with Isha on the phone when she asked me to do this. Is this really part of the scene of cellular agriculture and New Harvest? And she said yes, and it is, I guess, because cannabis is this big agriculture plant, or on its way to becoming a big cash crop, and a lot of farmers are starting to pay attention to it, and we're taking a bit of a different approach, and I'm going to tell you a bit about that. So, I am glad that I get to end this conference, or I guess be the last speaker and close off on a high note. Yes, okay, good. It's a joint venture. I don't know if that was, maybe that was too blunt. Okay, anyways. I can go for days, I've been doing this for a long time. But jokes aside, cannabis or alcohol or caffeine or anything else that I look at from a biochemistry perspective, because that's what I was trained in. And so when I see people talking about cannabis as like this magical healing plant, I think of what's actually happening in the human body. What are the chemical compounds that are doing these things, and how does the system work? And so this is just a quick image of the system and some of the different compounds that are involved. But really, I see these things kind of like building blocks where they connect to each other and they interact with each other and build different things. When these building blocks don't work well together, and like your normal system of which is called the endocannabinoid system, when that goes haywire, you end up with things like epilepsy or depression, anxiety. Glioblastoma is brain cancer, so that's a lot of different things that go wrong there, but actually there has been examples of clinical trials that have been successful in helping to treat glioblastomas using THC. And one of the longest time examples of use of THC in medicine is to treat nausea and appetite loss during cancer therapy. And I'll just dig a bit deeper into one of these examples, which is epilepsy. So this is kind of the start of what is now the big, huge wave of cannabis being like this marketable product and becoming a medical product. And it all started in 2013 with this little girl named Charlotte Figi. Charlotte's I guess she's about 8 years old now. But back in 2013, she became world famous because her parents treated her using a specific kind of medical cannabis. And her disease is called Dravet syndrome, which is a rare type of epilepsy that causes her to have as many as 300 seizures per week. And that went from 300 down to just a few per year. So it's this huge improvement, and kind of like, having met some of these patients, it's like revolutionary. Like they go from not being able to walk or talk to being able to like ride a bike and to have conversations, and it's like really just a huge improvement. So it's kind of this miracle story that became really popular worldwide and spurred a lot of like the legalization of medical cannabis and these kinds of things. And the building block that caused this to happen is called cannabidiol, or CBD. And it is one of two major cannabinoids in cannabis. The other one, of course, is THC, and they look quite similar, so that's why you get this class of compounds called cannabinoids. And this one's becoming more popular around not just epilepsy, but other things like depression, anxiety, and inflammation, and even some cases of cancer. But just to emphasize, once we know what the building blocks are, it becomes very easy to work with them. And so in the same year that Charlotte's Web became popular, and Charlotte's Web is the name of the strain that helped treat her that was very rich in cannabidiol. Once they figured out that cannabidiol was responsible, then a company called GW Pharmaceuticals immediately started developing a drug for childhood epilepsies that was based on CBD. And then just shortly afterwards, they're trying to broaden that across all kinds of adult epilepsies using a slightly different compound. And this is all within 3 years of this happening. So it is really important for us to figure out what these building blocks are and how they work, and so that we can quickly develop treatments instead of being, I guess some people in this industry are somewhat dismissive of the approach of like pharmaceuticals versus like natural products. But I'm saying that we do need to think about what these things are actually doing. And, oh, my slides got a bit messed up, but it's okay. The key things that I do want to focus on that are issues coming up now are with the question of scale and product diversity. And as we've seen earlier, I guess Jack Bobo talked about this as well, is that the question of scale is really important for cellular agriculture, and are we able to actually feed that many more people by using this new kinds of technology? And product diversity, I mean, if you look around you and all the different products that are here today, this is something that is also a big feature of cellular agriculture, and I can extend that by saying that if you look at the products that are cultured meats, like you don't have to culture just more beef cells, you can culture all kinds of cells, and so and then functionalize them maybe with different kinds of add-ons and make new materials that didn't exist before. And these two principles apply to us as well. So if I take an example of GW Pharmaceuticals and their CBDV compound, which is one of the more rare cannabinoids, if you were to treat 5 million people who had epilepsy, and there's 50 million people worldwide, you would need something like 1,500 tons of this product in its pure form. And one of the biggest cannabis growth operations right now in Canada, which is run by a company called Aurora, took $100 million, and they're only able to produce 32 tons. So they need to be, at least 100 times more in order to actually be able to meet that kind of demand. And if we really want to treat, these kinds of diseases and extend beyond that into conditions like diabetes or things that are more widespread, then we need even more production of these compounds. On top of that, many of these large producers are starting to realize that it is maybe quite difficult to actually grow cannabis at larger scales. So, we can grow tomatoes at large scales, and that's quite easy, and people are happy to do that. But can we actually grow cannabis at this, industry level? And we're only just starting to get into that and starting to realize, whether or not this is possible. And so this is just in the past year or so, several of the Canadian licensed producers of cannabis had issues with finding pesticide that somehow magically, I guess, I don't know, got into their crops. And this is a pesticide that is restricted and does cause a lot of damage if it is inhaled, which is, primarily how people use cannabis. So my question is, okay, how do you then produce 1,500 tons of pure cannabinoid? And of course, since you're all here today, I think you know the answer to this one, which is to use something like cellular agriculture. And so for us, this means engineering strains of yeast that have DNA, which is coming from the cannabis plant, for example, and then growing those new strains of yeast at large scales in these big steel tanks, and extracting cannabinoids at the end. Since we just saw a talk on plant cells, I guess you could also do this with plant cells, but that's actually been attempted and didn't quite work out for various reasons. But we like to use yeast, and yeast is a great organism for this stuff. And just to emphasize the scale thing, Amherst is another company that has been around for a while and doing this kind of yeast engineering, mostly focusing on flavors and fragrances now, but they used to be in also some biofuel stuff. But they built a pretty big facility in Brazil that was another $100 million investment, but their productivity levels were more in the range of, 3,000 tons, which is what we need to actually supply a large-scale market for this stuff. And just comparing that against Aurora again, they need to be a lot higher in order to actually meet the demand. And now the second issue that I'll point out, and this is more getting into the future of where these things are going as well, is that cannabis also only makes a few different products. So like I mentioned, there's two major cannabinoids, which are CBD and THC, but there's actually 100 different cannabinoids that the plant makes. And some of the more rare ones, like THCV or CBDV, are slight variants and aren't produced in very high quantities by the plant. And so to actually grow those ones at large scale, then it also makes sense to use a cellular agriculture approach. And when you're thinking about this kind of stuff, let me just think about how to explain this in the best way. So we know that plants have this ability to take sugar and convert it into something like THC, and there's a series of enzymes that do that chemical conversion. In this diagram, all the dots are the different products, and the lines are the enzymes that do these things. So you're starting from sugar, and there's a few steps to get up to one of the first precursors to, this works, right? Oh yeah, hey. Olivetolic acid, which is one of the first precursors for the cannabinoid pathway. And then you can add a few different enzymes and eventually get to THCA. And so what we're doing in our yeast strains is that we have, this green part exists already in the yeast. Like it takes in sugar and converts it into different kinds of things. And the things that we're introducing are the new enzymes that produce levothyric acid and cannabidiol acid and so on. And conceptually, you can do this with almost any kind of natural product. And one of our main advisors has done this with the opioid pathway too. So instead of having to grow poppies to get opioids and have that, black market exist as well, hopefully we can one day grow it using yeast and then eliminate the need for big poppy fields everywhere. And in terms of product diversity, the other advantage of using these kinds of systems is that you can pick and choose what you want to make. So if you took this pathway and you actually eliminated the need, the enzyme that makes THC, and you added a different enzyme that makes CBD, then that's the only product you're going to get out. And so we see this in plant cultivars of like hemp, which is low in THC but high in CBD, and cannabis, which is often high in THC but very low in CBD, and that's kind of one of the desirable traits people are searching for right now. But this gets a lot more complicated if you dig deeper into it, where there are several different products and several different enzymes that all do different kinds of things, and this is where our scientific challenge comes in. Is like, okay, what are these enzymes and how do we actually make these unique things? And some of these are undiscovered, some of these are known, and we have to figure out how to get them into a yeast. And we've had some success in doing these different kinds of things. And just a bit about the history of our company. We started out back in 2014 with an accelerator program called Rebel Bio, but we've been supported for the past 3 years from different government agencies and a lot of, not that much, but some private investment. And that has brought us up to today. But I guess the idea here is that, it used to be a big issue to actually get support for this kind of company in this kind of space. But now, governments and banks and investors are starting to change their minds about, what cannabis could be used for. And that's really important for this industry, and we want to keep moving things forwards. And the other thought that I'll leave you guys on is that in terms of thinking about where these products could be used and where they're headed, this is what's happening in Canada, where we are scheduled to legalize cannabis across Canada in July of next year. And some people see this as like, hey, great, now we can all go hang out in the streets and smoke weed, maybe. But actually, the way that they see it is interesting, where it's a bigger health issue to have a black market that's widespread than to have a regulated market that's legal. And I think more countries in general should approach this with this in mind, and think about what they should be doing in this industry to make it better. But again, the question of scale comes in, and if you do legalize cannabis, let's say, are you going to have enough scale to compete with how much product is flowing through the black market right now? And to some extent, yes, or maybe not, or maybe there is a market fit for us there, and we'll just wait and see how that goes. But I hope you guys can, you guys can ask me more questions on that later. And this is my team, who I'm happy to share with you guys. Shoam, Zach, and Alex are my co-founders. Jen is our first hire, who's on our BD team. Two main advisors are Dr. Tariq Warsi and Dr. Vince Martin, who's at Concordia University. And we're well on our way up, looking to maybe raise a Series A sometime soon, but looking for people that are also involved in biotech or maybe pharmaceutical development that can help us on our path. That's the end of my presentation.
So, first question is a loaded one, okay. I think, good. But I like it. Is this still cellular agriculture, or isn't it simply synthetic biology? And I think that's an interesting question because it's difficult to know where that line is sometimes.
I know. And you have opinions on this too, I know.
I do.
So, synthetic biology depends on how you define it. In some sense, maybe synthetic biology includes cellular agriculture, or maybe they are meant to be two different things. Some people are in the camp of synthetic biology as like it strictly involves synthetic life forms and wouldn't even include what we do. We do, in some ways, use synthetic DNA and synthetic biology in our development. But I guess is it cellular agriculture? I think so. Is it synthetic biology? I would say less so. I think our definition should be and this applies to other companies like Ginkgo and Amherst and other people here, is that it's not synthetic biology. Synthetic biology should be its own thing, and this technology should either be called metabolic engineering, maybe, or cellular agriculture could be the word to use. But yeah, I mean, we'll wait and see, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have any samples? That's
yeah, if you guys underneath your chair, there's little vials, and you have to. Like,
you're gonna.
open them?
Yeah.
No.
Don't.
Not this year. Not this
Not
year.
this year.
I did really want to have a booth here today, but
Yeah.
I'll have to. I decided to hold off for now, and I'll do the booth next year.
You know, when
I
he's
think,
passing out those stickers, what they really are.
Hey. Come back next year. Yeah.
Can you integrate cannabis into food as an alternate way to take his therapy? So would you consider formulations of your product in food?
Short answer is yes. This is a really interesting thing that happens in cannabis and doesn't happen anywhere else in healthcare almost, where you can take cannabis in basically any form that you want to. Like sometimes it's a cream, sometimes it's like a mouth spray. Obviously, like smoking and vaping exists, or maybe it's in brownies or in like an oil that you add to some water, like all kinds of different things. And so this kind of is a question that I like to ask for myself, and I think we'll ask this question more and more as we get closer to product development stuff. But like, what is the best way to actually use this compound? And if we are dealing with competing against a black market product, then how else can we do that? Or yeah, these kinds of things. So if it's, can you integrate it into food? Short answer is yes. And people are doing that already all over the place.
Let's see. Are you only working on therapeutic applications, or would you be interested in expanding into recreational applications of? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, one idea is that in terms of thinking about the scale of this industry, there's compounds like, I mean, aspirin, which are in every person's household cupboard or something of that sort, which is just something you take for a headache. Cannabidiol is one of those compounds that might be heading in that direction too, where it is something that is a household product and everybody will kind of have it available for treating something if they have a bad day. Hey, I didn't mean it that way. Or maybe it's something that you do keep in your alcohol cabinet that is like another kind of product that everybody does end up using widely. And the perspective is changing on that in terms of, you know, who's going to use it and who's going to want to use it and how often and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. For us, I mean, we're still very much on the, like, it's an ingredient side of things, and if it means that we can solve a problem here and it makes sense as a market to get into, then we'll definitely explore it.
Excellent. So there are a couple of interesting societal implications of this that are popping up in the question. So one of these,
I like those ones.
Yeah. How do you think? So given the current, the changing perceptions of cannabis in the United States, and the legacy of the war on drugs, how could cultured marijuana be used to maybe help those who were maybe wrongly jailed for marijuana use or sale during the war on drugs?
Yeah, very good question. I don't know who asked that, but there's actually somebody else that I talked to just recently who's working on projects in that area specifically. And for us, I mean, as a company, we have to, there's only so much we can do right now. And for now, it's like, you know, build the technology. We're a team of 7 people. Like, we can't quite get into like all of this stuff quite yet, even though I would love to. We'll see how the market looks. I mean, to some extent, maybe there is a way of getting these people to participate in the industry again, but instead of having them being, you know, just growing cannabis and doing that whole thing, then maybe they are part of the distribution system and they are participating in the industry, even though they maybe have this like criminal background. Mm-hmm. And it's a very interesting issue though to kind of, you know, how do we do that? And right now it's true that in a lot of states and in Canada, like if you have a criminal record, you can't work in the industry. It's kind of this, you know, divide that is being drawn. But if we're able to make the material and if there are people that need to sell the material that we provide, then maybe that's one way that this could exist, where it's like, okay, somewhere we're growing a whole lot of yeast, and the products are being sold by people who are were discriminated in that way.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hire more people that would be, kind of give those opportunities as well. But we'll see if they are willing to be trained to be fermentation engineers or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know yet.
That's really excellent. Another thing that I didn't mention in your bio, but you're one of the founding members, I believe, of Brico Bio, which is a community biology lab.
Community bio.
Yay, community bio and citizen science is a really big theme here. And so one of the questions, also somewhat socially oriented, it seems like big pharma companies are doing a lot of centralization and then distribution, especially with former synthetic forms of products like this. So how do you get citizens involved in this process to avoid a consolidation of technology and wealth?
Right. So the one thing about consolidation and centralization that's important is that you do need to have, reliable, super high quality products that are pharmaceuticals, and that tends to mean that having large, centralized, tightly regulated facilities are better for that kind of market. So I think the idea that it's bad to have big centralized pharmaceutical companies is maybe one that isn't such a bad idea. It might be it's maybe good that I don't have 50 options if I wanted to use insulin or whatever. I have one or two, and my doctor knows which one is the best. But in terms of distribution of technology, that's one that we'll have to wait and see how that pans out. I think there's a couple. The other thought that I'll offer in this direction is that in Canada, everybody's going to be able to grow their own cannabis pretty soon if they wanted to, and citizens can gather together and figure out how to do that in the best way. And a lot of the science that actually, a lot of the technology, in the case of Charlotte Figuier, it was they found the compound and then GW developed it into a drug, and they were willing to take that financial risk and prove out something that was coming from a discovery of a citizen. And I'm pretty sure that the Charlotte Figuier's family have, made some either nonprofits or some wealth from that overall thing. I don't think they're directly connected to the profits of GW Pharmaceuticals, but I guess I don't really have an answer to that question. I'm not answering it at all. I'm just kind of giving examples of citizens exist. Citizens exist in this, and big pharmas exist in this, and they both serve their purpose. The centralization of wealth into big pharma companies isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I might be more okay with that happening than with having my neighbor also being able to grow my drugs kind of thing, because that sounds more sketchy than a pharma company. There's some trust there that is established and regulations. Mm-hmm. But if we can find, and this is something that you might see in the cannabis area as well, if you can distribute the manufacturing of a product and make that an open source thing, or if it's not an open source thing, you can still make your own pharmaceuticals at home using patented drugs. It's just hard and dangerous. And that could exist too. So, anyways. Yeah. Kind of a long answer, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think, unfortunately, we're out of time. There's so many interesting questions up here. I'm sure that Kevin would be willing to answer some of them one-on-one after. But thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you for a wonderful talk.